Mike Hagan, thank you so much for joining us today. This one is one that I've been looking forward to doing for a little while, and primarily because there's some personal stuff in this one for me. For the folks at home, it's about mental health in business, and given the past few years, it's one of those things that that's obviously something we need to worry about. It's sort of the pandemic after the pandemic. Mike, tell us a little bit about primarily what got you into mental health work, and a bit of background as to what got you here.
Thanks, Mike. Absolute pleasure to be here. So, probably gathered already through that very, very short vocalisation there that this isn't a genuine Ferntree Gully accent.
Yeah, right.
So, north of England originally.
Yeah.
So I'm sure you can put subtitles on this after the edit.
It's almost a bit Scottish, yeah? Is that, does it get...
40 miles from the border.
Yeah, right, there you go.
So they used to pop over to steal our sheep and footballs.
Yeah, right.
Yes, I've been in Australia now for some 17 years. And prior to that, quite a checkered career rather than a checkered past. So originally tradie, fitter and turner, many, many years ago. Actually got a job as an electrician, and a week in they said you're colourblind, you're a fitter. And that wasn't a bad thing, because that was on a...
Kept getting electrocuted?
Yeah, look, it could have been a bad end, because that was on a nuclear plant.
Oh, right.
And I was there and thereabouts a civil servant, I guess, for 25 years in the nuclear industry. So I went in as a colourblind electrician, and before I moved out to Australia, I was a safety manager on a nuclear waste silo. And it's funny, because people, when they talk to me about that time in the nuclear industry, they don't ask about, nuclear energy. They don't ask about Chernobyl and Fukushima. They ask me, was it like The Simpsons?
Oh, yeah.
And, I haven't signed the Official Secrets Act. I can't really go into that.
Can't say anything.
But look, I went back to school in my late 20s, mid to late 20s, and done a whole lot of thing around obviously on a nuclear plant, around radiological protection. And I was a plant manager for a while. And then and that's when I guess I had my introduction to mental health as a topic, because, you're of that age, you're mid-20s, and you're a bloke, so clearly you're bulletproof.
Correct.
And I thought I was having insomnia, wasn't sleeping. And so obviously you're a bloke in the north of England, so I'll have a drink. And then I'll have 2 drinks, and then you're not sleeping well at all. And then I started to get quite severe anxiety symptoms. And what I mean by severe is I could front up at work, and I could do all the things that you needed to do to have a very significant role on a nuclear plant, but you wouldn't go to the supermarket on your own.
Yeah.
And I tell this story to people, and so many people resonate with it. And the other part that resonate with it is it took me 5 years to tell anybody about it. So, I term it as I've got a lived experience. I was diagnosed as free-floating anxiety. And
what is free-floating anxiety for?
Free-floating is it's really well described. It can hit you at any time, anywhere, for no apparent reason. And, the things where I had to front up and be engaged and do things, I was high-performing, but as soon as I actually got away from the work environment, and it's ironic because, we talked earlier about music, and all through this period, I was a musician playing in a band at the weekends and dreading gigs.
Yeah, wow.
So you put yourself in this vicious cycle. But I didn't know what was going on, to be truthful. And the epiphany, as it was a colleague who I had a lot of time for. I'm an ex-union rep as well, and so you don't.
Staunch.
That's it. Bloke, union rep.
Yeah.
And it was a colleague who actually opened up one day about how he was feeling, and he talked about anxiety and nervousness, and it was like he'd been following me around, And I thought, wow, that's good news. I'm not a freak, not in that way, anyhow. And I went to see a doctor, and 5 years in, and explained how I was feeling, and he said, "What do you do for a living, Mike?" So I said, "I work on a nuclear plant. I look after a lot of safety things on a nuclear plant." He said, "Yeah, you're the first this week," and he said, "It's He termed it back then, as work-related stress. This was the late 90s. And I laughed, and he laughed, and he said, "You're the first this week, mate." And when I went and finally spoke to the organisation about it, clearly they'd dealt with this before. And there was a mechanism, there was a process. They were a really good company to work for. And that was my first experience of speaking to a counsellor. And that went quite deep, and I learned a lot of things about myself. And probably, I would say, 5 years to dig back out of the position I was in. And it took a career change because while I'd been looking after the safety side of a plant, I actually moved across into OHS. And ironically, I ended up looking after the plant that I had been the plant manager for. So, full circle. But, that condensed 5-minute description, there was a lot of depth and colour to it, and then most of the colours weren't bright. And so into OHS roles, and took with me what I'd learned from my experiences. And, and when I talk to people about this topic, I don't labour on my story because people don't want to hear my story. I just want people to know there is a point of reference, because from that point on, I realised the fix wasn't the counsellor. The fix was getting the work right. And I think the way that we did manage, and we do manage now to a large extent, mental health in the workplace is still quite flawed.
Oh, yeah, most definitely. I think even the way that we term anxiety these days has changed and is changing. And I more recently have realised that I suffer from levels of anxiety. And when I was a kid growing up, anxiety is, as far as I knew, stress or nervousness. And that was really it. What else does anxiety mean? I had my first panic attack, diagnosed panic attack, probably 2017 it would have been. And I didn't know what was going on. I had no idea what was going on. It happened, I was in the lounge room at home by myself, and you get hot, all the blood drains from your head, you start feeling dizzy and lightheaded, and I thought I was having a heart attack or something was going on. Lay down on the couch for a little bit, tried to compose myself. I went to the doctor a couple of days later, and he's like, "Yeah, it sounds like a panic attack." I'm like, why would I be having a panic attack? I've got nothing to worry about. It's, everything's fine. Life is okay. But it's not, right? It's sort of the case that your body is telling you something's wrong and you're not paying attention to it. So I'm going to start just shutting you down. But I'm particularly interested in the understanding of the contextualization of what anxiety is. But, talking about business, how do we recognize that amongst colleagues in particular or people that are working for you or with you? How do you recognize that there might be an issue? And then how do you approach it? What is everyone, we've got, are you okay day? So one day a year, I'm going to ask you if you're okay. But what is the technique that we should be using in business to keep an eye on our colleagues?
Now, there's $1 million question. Look, I'll go broad and then I'll come back to the point, as I do tend to meander in my answers, but trust me, there is a pattern. There's a purpose. What do we do? People often talk to me about burnout, and people have arrived at burnout through anxiety, through a whole bunch of mismatches between the capability and the capacity and the work demands. And I always say to people, you look for the small things, because it doesn't pop up at 5 to midnight and all of a sudden at midnight it's there. And it's the changes in that person that you've worked with for a while you're starting to notice. I remember somebody once saying to me, I'm coming to work, I'm waking up tired. I come to work after waking up tired. And I thought, wow, that's not good. And one of the things is a pervasive negativity. So people that were previously, I'm not looking for people to be the life and soul of the party, but people that generally had a more optimistic outlook on things, you'll start to hear a negative diatribe begin. And it's not just the, I'm still here for Monday. not bad for a Monday type of comment.
Yep.
And you start to see a detachment, and that's some of the signs that you're starting to see changes in behaviour. Now, is that anxiety? Is that depression? Who knows? We're not doctors. And, I'll go front and centre and say to people, look, I'm not a doctor, so don't you try and be one unless you've got a certificate on your wall. But when you're starting to see a change, the conversation is to say, I've noticed a change. Is there anything that you want to talk about? Is there anything? And, there's an awful lot of peer support networks and organisations, mental health first aid, and I'll talk a little bit about the pros and cons of that as I see it later. But I always say the thing to do is get the person to the person that can help them. And if you are a doctor, well and good, help them. But, and certainly if I reflect on my own experience, it was the turning point was speaking to a GP and them saying, well, I don't specialise in this, but he's somebody that does. So in terms of, anxiety, it's the most common mental illness in Australia today, followed by depression and then substance abuse. And you see all of those things manifest in the workplace. What can organisations do? They can look harder. They can look harder to look for not only the onset but the causes. And there's a fantastic quote that people that have worked with me are probably sick of hearing from Archbishop Desmond Tutu. And Desmond Tutu said that, there comes a time when we have to stop pulling people out of the river and we need to go upstream and see why people are falling in. And, a huge amount of time and energy and finance is utilised in Australia and many other countries on the downstream activities. And
the treatments and things as opposed to,
And I often think, if I had my phone within reach, that for many years I had the EAP cards in the back of there in case these conversations eventuate. But what are we really saying? Somebody opens up and says, I've got a problem. Well, we better get you fixed.
Yeah.
And what organisations need to be doing, and what some of the more enlightened organisations are doing now is saying, well, if the work was the cause of it, what can we do to better fix the work? Now, the work was fit for purpose when it was put in place, but things, look at the last 3 years, a lot changes and changes quickly. So I'm a big advocate of fix the work. We talk about primary and secondary and tertiary levels of control, and the primary it's a good old hierarchy of controls to all my OHS friends out there. If we can actually fix the issues at source, then there's the secondary piece around education, so at least you know what's happening to you. And then there's the downstream, there's the EAPs, the mental health first aids, the peer support. Now, that downstream stuff ain't never going to fix the problem. And there's a fantastic book by Christina Maslach about burnout. I think she's the mother of burnout from an academic point of view. And she opens up one of her books talking about canaries in coal mines. And the old adage back in, I think it was in Wales, in England. Apologies, my Welsh friends.
You're in trouble.
Wales in the United Kingdom. That's contentious enough. And she makes the point. The issue in mines, it wasn't to make canaries more resilient, so they can breathe more carbon monoxide. It was an indication that we need to do something different. So. Long answer, but in terms of, anxiety, we don't know what the diagnosis is. We just know something's not like it used to be. We know that somebody's not travelling well, as I love that Australian phrase. And if we can encourage the person to speak to somebody that can help them, but then we need to go back and look at the organisation. And I often say to organisations, look at the stories that you tell about yourself. The platitude, good old finance, heal midnight again.
Yep.
Yeah, there's nothing good about that.
No.
It's just shit work planning.
Yep.
So I don't know if that answers your question, Mike, but
it certainly does, because it's more like this is a business. I've been with this business now for 3 years, and it's a business that is really driven by how do we look after our people, and a lot of businesses, particularly in a modern ecosystem, they're very excited about canned culture. Like, oh, we'll put on a morning tea, or we'll do like a bowling night or something like that. And it comes up 2 or 3 times a year. And then those bosses are sitting back and going, well, why hasn't anything changed? To come to a business where the culture is it, like it's the most important thing. And there's been leaders come through the business that, have not necessarily added weight to that culture, and some have, and the business has a natural way of readjusting itself to filter out, things that don't work. And I think that is, for me, that is the thing that you can see that there's culture that is about support and about more than that. It's when the culture takes care of itself, right? It's who was it? Richard Branson, I think, said, you look after the people look after the business. And that is what I think is the secret, right? It's letting culture dictate what the end game is, as opposed to trying to squeeze culture in around all the other things you're normally doing. Is that where you see the foot forward in if your business needs to have a look at itself? Yep.
Culture. People will talk about what is culture, and according to the Wikipedia, which I made up in my head, the best explanation I can give to people is think of the classic Venn diagram of three circles, and in one circle you've got the formal organisation, the policies and the procedures and all the things that we write and sign off on, and then you've got your informal organisation in your second circle, and that's if you want to really get it done, speak to Bob on night shift or speak to Betty in afternoon shift. She'll sort it out. It's the way that things get done around here. And then the third circle is us, individuals, human beings, and we come in all shapes and sizes and variants. So if you think about where those three circles actually interlock, that's the culture of an organisation. But there's a larger circle all the way around that, and it's what I call authentic leadership.
Yep.
So I mentioned what I used to do. Since I've been in Australia, I was in a corporate gig with a well-known multinational for a number of years, and I got an opportunity there to put in some strategic solutions around this stuff. And now I talk to other organisations about what they can do. And the first thing I speak to is the heads of business. And the question I ask of them is, what culture do you aspire to? And I get a wide array of answers. And I try and help them. I'll say, well, what about a culture where you would like your son, your daughter, your mother or your father to work in that workplace? I go, yeah, that kind of works. Right, let's start with that. Let's start with what that looks like. And the cultural piece, if you haven't got buy-in at the most senior level, your culture ain't ever going to float. And
Correct.
Yep. I've seen great examples, I've seen terrible examples. But tone at the top, it's people do, humans for millennium have done what's important to the boss. And if the boss is genuine and authentic and stands up and can be vulnerable about their own situation. One of the things I've done with an organisation that worked really well, I got the leadership group to, I said, I want you to make a short video for me. It's going to be the easiest thing you get asked to do today. It's only going to be 30 seconds. And the sentence you're going to set off with is, I look after my own mental health and well-being by, so go for your life. And there was a bit of consternation and some questions about what to do and how to do it. And, the engineers went too deep and the finance used too many numbers and we got all that stuff. Yep. And it was great. People opened up and we had people from walking the dogs to surfing to playing the drums to doing. And all of a sudden, your boss's boss was saying, I need to look after myself and this is what I need to do. And it really started to shift the conversation. So culture, absolutely. Yep. And culture, the tone is set at the top.
What about, the practice of OH&S is this thing that has been pretty prevalent for 20, 25 years. It wasn't really before that, but it's very easy to walk around an office or walk around a job site and, with your OH&S checklist and, platforms are good, ladders are good, boots are good, helmets are good. How do you put in that preventative strategy when we're talking about mental health and well-being?
Right, $2 million question.
As long as we keep going up.
There you go. It's really, really hard. Now, I've got a few professional badges, but the one that I really came through and matured and spent a lot of time was OHS. So it was risk management. And if a forklift truck comes through the wall and hits me or hits you, Mike, we're done. That's it. If you and I have to work 60 hours a week, 75 hours a week for the next 12 months, bounces off you and you're bulletproof. And it does me. I end up in a real mess and not in a good place because of it. So how do you manage that? It's...
Because the intent would be, well, what's wrong with Mike? When Mike, it's two Mikes here for those that are confused, but when Mike, Island Mike, deals with it fine and Mike Hagan doesn't, what is the instinct to say, well, we need to get someone to replace Mike Hagan, or would we normally go, why is it that Mike has been affected by this and the other Mike hasn't?
Yeah. Seen both responses. I've seen both responses, but put it in a bigger frame and just think about how hard this problem is. So let's go back to what you said about OHS. Now, OHS, they've got the tricks, they've got the risk assessment tools, they've got all the dance floor moves.
Yep.
They know how to manage risk. But there's this thing came along that you can't see. You know, you can hear it if you know what to listen for, and we've got to use the same tools and mechanisms. Now, it gets a bit more complicated because from a legislative point of view, they've moved it into OHS legislation, so clearly it's an OHS topic. OHS deal downstream. So OHS, traditionally, you know, they're helping the people that have been injured. We're filling out the accident report form. We're going to review the risk assessment. The solution for mental health challenges in the workplace is bad work. And that really is in the domain of HR. So we've got some legislation that lives with OHS. We've got the tricks and tools for finding or getting towards what the hazards and the risks are. And I'll talk about the difference between hazards and risks in a moment. And then we need HR to come along and put the fix in place. Now think about the natural hierarchy in an organisation. Normally OHS sort of sit around here. You know, you got your exec there and HR will be sitting. So it really needs those three parties to come together and bring different aspects towards. Nobody's got the silver bullet. There's no one function got the answer to this. Why it's also really hard to manage with the current mindset and the current tools is because the way you get to the bottom of it is you've got to go out and ask an organisation and the employees, how do you feel? How do you feel about this? What does this make you feel? Boy, that could be a difficult conversation. What if they come back and say, I don't feel too good and I don't want to continue working these hours.
Yeah.
Or
I don't like this project that I'm on. I don't like this team that I'm in.
So now we know. And, you know, we always say you can't unhear things. But bear in mind, we're also going out to people. So you're going out to Mike in the 90s, this Mike, and you're asking me a question about how I feel. I would have told you I felt great because I didn't want to have the conversation. So we've got a conversation that needs to be had by people that might be worried about the answer they get from people that might not want to give an answer.
Yeah, right.
So, you know, it's really, really difficult. So there's a lot of useful tools that are available now. The amount of help for organisations is incredible, but it's hidden in plain sight. And it's written by people like me that used to write OHS policies.
Yeah.
And we need to get that to human speak, and we need to help people go out and actually identify what the hazards are. OHS are great at that. They're really good. But they need a new skill set. You know, they need org psychs and they need people that understand work planning. They need HR to work with them. Now, I've seen some organisations where you get a standoff to say, well, it's not an HR topic, or it's not an OHS topic. HR say they're dealing with that.
Yeah.
No, it's a people topic. It's a people problem. And the organisations that are doing this well, they've got everybody in one conversation with the leadership at the front saying, I don't really understand this, but we need to get to the bottom of it because it's big. It ain't going away. You know, the societal expectation around a mentally healthy workplace has changed completely as well. You know, look at the conversations around about hybrid working now.
Yeah.
You know, it's a whole different dialogue.
That was going to be my question. So given that we've gone into this hybrid space and now we don't have people under the watchful eye, you might not see an employee for 2, 3, 4 weeks in the flesh. Is that introducing more things to be aware of and more measures where we need to reach out and extend that opportunity of care to people that might be working at home?
We're up to the $3 million question now. You've got all these, it's almost like we rehearsed this. The whole hybrid...
We didn't rehearse this, by the way, for folks at home. We didn't rehearse this at all.
I would have worked on my accent much more if we rehearsed this. Look, I've got first-hand experience of, you know, we all went into COVID and we locked down, and I was running crisis management teams and looking after HR and health and safety. And then we got, I can't remember which time we went back to the office in Victoria. We had 2 or 3 visits.
Yeah, it was like June, I think, May, June 2020, we were allowed back for a little bit. And then that's when the big lockdown hit, was like August. And that was the one where it was curfew, masks,
it was
5Ks. Yeah, that was the crunch.
And I went back in the office after that, and I wanted to be front and centre and be visible there. And honestly, Mike, people I've been talking to for 2 years over Zoom, over Skype, there was clearly issues there. And look, I like to think I'm pretty switched on around this topic, with my own experience and spending so much time around putting processes in place. But people that I just never detected there was an issue, and they weren't travelling well.
Yeah.
But I read a great quote recently, and the author, the name escapes me, but they made the point about working from home. There's the for camp and the against camp, and the truth lies in between. But he said, always remember, solitary confinement's a punishment for a reason.
Yeah.
And it's, I think there's a real need to give people autonomy as part of the set of tools that you have for a mentally healthy workplace.
Yep.
But I think you've got to be really, really careful to make sure that it's for the greater good, because otherwise you'll suffer the loss of what I call workplace community.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, that really, I started in this business March 2020. So it was 2 weeks before, 2 weeks to flatten the curve. That was the first one. And I had a team of, I think at that time it was maybe 17 people. And I didn't see a majority of them in the flesh until probably November or December that year. So I'm coming into a new business, senior leadership position. I'm all about people, and I can't be with my people. And then I'm home, in the work from home situation. I was in a small townhouse at that point. I was engaged in a relationship. That relationship started to break down, as a lot did during COVID. And then all of a sudden I find myself at home, isolated, no partner, no work community yet, because I hadn't yet built one. I had a good community of sporting. I practice Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, so I've got a good family of sporting people, but we couldn't hang out with them either. And that was a time for me where it was like, how am I now meant to be the strong leader that's making an impression on my people where I'm falling apart? And so what do I do? Fortunately, the owners of this business that you know quite well, Dan in particular is one of those guys that's just always there. He was a pillar of support for me. But I think, it's more so about looking at, now that we've got people at home, what are some of the things that we can do to make sure that we are bringing those people back into the community that you speak about? Because the one thing that I notice in our business is getting people to come back to the office wasn't hard, because it's a great place to work and people really enjoy that community, and it does feel like a family. So what do we need to do to put the seeds in place that are going to grow that sort of environment?
$4 million.
$4 million.
Yeah. Keeping tabs on this.
Well, I'm going to finish it at 15. So,
look, what I advise anybody who's managing a workplace or a company is go into the conversation with an open mind. And most of us don't have that around this topic. I spoke to the people that wanted to go back to just like it was. I'd love the Beatles to get back together. Ain't going to happen. And I speak to the people that now think they don't need any real estate and everything can be done from home. And nobody's right and nobody's wrong. And what I say about going into the conversation with an authentic, open mind is, the question that I've put to people is to say, look, this is what needs to be done. I'm not talking about working from home. I'm not even talking about the person at the moment. This is what the role needs to fulfill. And we've all got the position descriptions, etc. But then have a broader conversation to say, and there needs to be a meaningful contribution towards workplace community in that role. So how can that look for you? And ask the person to say, look, what and start the conversation and engage them, because they might have some great ideas. One of the things that really isolates us as managers is we've got to have all the good ideas.
Yeah.
And, we put a huge amount of pressure on ourselves, and I think we all go through that curve, Mike. But go into the conversation with an open mind and ask people what they can do to fulfill their role whilst contributing meaningfully to the workplace community. You can't make everybody happy. And there's a difference between engagement and happy. If you can have happy and engaged, that's fantastic. But the aim isn't to make people happy. The aim is to have engaged people that are doing things. And through engagement, you won't get unhappiness, but it's a workplace, it's not a commune. So you've got to go into the conversation with an open mind and consult. You know, there's a reason why consultation is such a pivotal piece in, you know, all change management that works well.
Yep.
And it's to have that conversation and then come with the best of. You know, you're going to get the best of album. You're not going to get everybody's favourite track, but at least you can put it together and start to work through and monitor it. Have a look in 3 months, 6 months, 12 months.
And putting employees on a growth pathway as well, I found has always been one of those things that matters. It's, you know, some people can just stale in a job that they've done the same way for 10, 15 years. And they've been doing it for 10 or 15 years, but without sort of thinking it's actually batshit crazy, bored of it and wants a change.
Yeah.
And one of the things I've tried to bring into my leadership style over the past 2 appointments is really about, like to your point, counselling staff in that how can we make sure that you're consistently evolving as a person?
Yeah.
Because growth is the thing that puts us all in a better spot, right? It's when you think you're getting better at something or when you're achieving something or when you're able to deliver something that you weren't able to deliver 12 months ago. That's one of those things that gives you direction. Are they the sorts of things that we need to be more conscious of?
It's a really hard one because, you know, the traditional approach of having an annual appraisal, once a year I'm going to talk to you about stuff. You know, it's bollocks, to use the old vernacular. And it needs to be an ongoing dialogue and an ongoing conversation. But I also spent 12 years in HR dealing with many, many colourful problems. And the biggest problem I saw around people interaction with the managers was actually managers that didn't understand the difference between being personable and being personal. You know, there's a difference between knowing everybody's first name and then playing golf with somebody every Sunday. Because at some point you might have to make some hard decisions, and that makes it really hard. Now, I'm not saying be a brick, you know, I don't have any emotions, but it's finding that appropriate level of communication and interaction where a conversation about how somebody's travelling isn't that unusual.
Yeah.
But you're not being pervasive. You're not actually. It's not an interrogation. It's not a performance management discussion.
Yep.
You know, and I've seen people with fantastic technical skills and shockingly bad people skills, and that's why you need other.
That's most technical people. I
know there's an awful lot of engineers in this building.
Well, and they'll vouch for it. They'll vouch for it themselves.
But yeah, so it's an authentic, ongoing dialogue. And when I first came to your organisation, what's absolutely apparent is people want to be here. And as soon as you see that, and you know, the values are on the wall, etc. But what's always impressed me with you guys is you've actually arrived at what a lot of big corporations want to do from a cultural perspective. And you've done it without, you know, a hubris, without a big fanfare. It's just authentic conversations from people that actually do care.
Yeah. And that's a good, you highlighted, you know, the difference between a small business and a large business. It's obviously a little bit easier to influence and communicate to smaller bodies of people.
Yeah.
What do we do as a business goes through rapid growth, particularly in the instance where you're forced to recruit 15, 20% additional headcount? Now you've got this flood of uncultured people coming into the business. What are some of the things that we can do or we need to be aware of if we're going through rapid growth in maintaining that culture?
Man, you got all the smart questions today, Mike.
I try. I try. Do you want a lolly? If you're that way inclined.
Yeah, I can do that.
Yeah, they're pretty awesome.
I won't eat one all at once,
Yeah,
or my
no,
accent
it's
will
hard
become even more elusive. I'll give you a real-time example. My wife, Jane, she spends a lot of time doing animal welfare and animal rescue, and she put in for a job recently at the RSPCA. And she's looked at the job ad, and the job ad was all about mental health workplaces, and just looking at that job ad, you know that it's a live topic there. Now, could that be what the term as a well-washing, where people put things up front? Don't know. But that's, you know, a pivotal piece for somebody making decisions for what job they go for. So I think if you can actually, I talk about holistic, strategic approaches to mental health, and people say, oh, what's strategic and what's holistic? You know, strategic is plugged it into the things that you already do strategically well, and holistic is from what I call pre-hire to post-retire. And the pre-hire is, you know, you're looking at the job ad and you're thinking, they're talking about it here, so it must be a thing within that organisation. I've got an affinity with that. I want to go and look at that organisation. That's one thing you can do. When I talk about post-retire, It's when, if you're an organisation, many organisations of size and girth will have a retirees club. And why aren't we giving them the same education and insights around mental health that we do for the existing employees?
Yeah.
So it's really having it as part of an ongoing dialogue. Harken back to the cultural piece. What I tried to do in the last large organisation I worked for, the definition around what we wanted to achieve was a workplace where you could have a conversation about mental health, and there would be no stigma, there would be no discrimination, there would be no judgment. You could have that conversation in the same way you could have it about a pulled muscle, a cruciate ligament. And it's really, again, coming back to your core point of culture. Now, you're going through the hiring curve, you're trying to get lots of people, and that's really, really hard at the moment. You put yourself out there for what you are, and in the interview, there's a conversation that says, this is what we expect from a code of behaviour and, the common decency things.
Yeah.
And it's really putting that out and then following it up as well. Because ultimately, the things that make work bad, it's not a written policy.
No.
It's not a piece of software. It's people's behaviour.
Yep. And the beautiful thing I find about interviewing these days is it's so quick to work out whether or not someone is going to be right for that culture or not.
What do you look for, Mike? What's the giveaway?
It's always about attitude. And I think you can speak to someone in an interview and their resume can be glowing, where from a technical standpoint, it's like that would be the dream person for me. I would put them in a role. I would know that they would take over and they would just get everything done. And I'm so excited and so, eager to interview someone. And then you can walk into the room and sit down and, how was your weekend? Oh, this and then this and then because this job and then and I'm like, no, it's that indicator, because that's that that small cancerous cell or two that left unchecked starts to spread. So I think the one thing that I found that's become easier for me is getting through an interview in trying to understand whether someone is the right cultural fit or not, because you can revert back to just it's conversational. You don't have to worry about prying for the technical. It's just if you can keep that conversation as casual and as weekend-like as possible, you'll be able to work out whether that's the right person in a shorter amount of time than you would by reading all of the information. So that's definitely something that I find has been a better tool. When businesses are looking for the right people, what is the dialogue and the emphasis that we need to be putting in, even things like advertisements, to make sure that people are aware and I refer to it as a no dickhead policy, that there's a very strict no dickhead policy, in the business you're about to apply for.
There's lots of policies you would like to write, but you can only write them in your head.
Yeah.
But I understand the sentiment.
Yeah.
Look, again, it's, I'll go into HR, speak about the employee value proposition, and it's where we position ourselves in the marketplace and how we're seen. And that goes beyond the job ad. Can be around the corporate social responsibility activities. Who do we align with? What charities are we aligned to? What philanthropic activities does the organisation get involved with? And I always ask people that question about what do you look for when you're interviewing, because I only look for two things. I want somebody who's capable of learning and changing, and I want somebody that wants to be here. Mm. And so my question that I always ask at the front of an interview is, tell me as much as you know about the organisation that you want to join. And if they can't tell me, an in-depth, and I'm talking about last year's, annual report, if it's available, if they haven't took the time in the front end to look at that, I start a question, do they really, really want to be here? Mm. But going back to what an organisation can do to help orientate people quickly as to how the culture is open conversations. I've seen it work really well where peers are involved in the interview process and it becomes an informal chat. Okay, it's another round of interview. It takes longer. But the cost of a hire today has never, ever been higher. So the HR Institute partnered with an organisation recently to look at the cost of a hire. So I know we're talking about people, and I hate talking about dollars around the mental health, but I'll dance with the devil if it moves the needle. And the cost of a hire, in 2021, let me get my figures right, it jumped from about $10,500 through to $23,000.
Yeah, right.
And the time to hire went from 6 weeks to 8 weeks. Now, that's a lot of pain for an organisation.
And that, I think that's a good, 8 weeks is good. There are some roles we've had here for 3-4 months.
Their average figures, that goes from your CEO through to, the other parts of the organisation. And, it's really important to get that right. If it takes a second interview or a third interview or a social conversation with the Ps to get their opinion, I don't think that's a bad investment these days. Because, and that's one of the true costs of poor mental health in a workplace. I spoke to an organisation a couple of weeks ago, and it was internal information, so they're a large organisation, and they're looking at data that indicates at the moment that 20 people leave for every one person that puts a work cover claim in for a mental health topic.
Wow.
So 20 people, they vote with their feet. And when you think about organisations you've been in, you're probably actually, I know a couple of people that decided to think about each one of those as, it's not even 23,000, because that was the information that Ari, the HR Institute, put together. There's a Harvard Business Report that talks about once you've got the person and you get them on board, it actually takes 5 months to get up to speed. And in their report, it was in US dollars. They said it costs between 5,000 and 15,000 US, or sort of double that for Aussie, on top of your hiring costs. So it's actually more expensive than many work cover claims. And people talk about mental health in, work cover claims and avoiding work cover claims. No, just treat people well and avoid them leaving, and you'll really save a lot of money if money is a conversation.
Yeah. Is this still an issue that plagues men more than women?
Two blokes talking about it. So, again, no medical background that I'm going to fall back on, but if you look at the information that's readily available from your Beyond Blues, etc., there's 9 people going to commit suicide in Australia today, and 6 of them are going to be guys. The statistics around suicide attempts, 65% of suicide attempts are females, but the actual suicides, there's definitely a topic around that. I looked into some of the research ones. I asked the question, why is there such a difference between suicide between men and women? And there's theories. About one is the method that males tend to choose is more acute.
Yep.
And as to why we do it, I think a lot of it goes back to the stigma. And, we talked about the stigma of you don't want to talk about it. And, I reflect why, hindsight's 2020, why didn't I want to talk about it? Because I didn't want to be seen as weak.
Yeah.
And, I hold firm the most courageous thing I done was speaking to a GP. So I think as a species, we set ourselves, as men, we set ourselves an incredibly high expectation on ourselves that often I don't think other people have.
Most definitely. It's close to home for me. I lost an uncle, so my mother's brother, when I was 19. So that's 20 odd years ago. And my stepfather, my mum's husband, he succumbed to suicide 2015. And to your point, both outcomes very acute. My uncle, interestingly enough, was very engaged in mental care. So he was doing all the right things, and he would go through bouts of on medication, off medication, and those sorts of things. A bit of a rough ride. My stepfather, because again, both men, from the 50s. So my stepfather, completely different, because he was the ultimate old, staunch Aussie guy. So, has to be able to provide for a family, has to be able to, be the president of the football club, has to be able to do all these things. Behind the scenes, the world is falling apart. And I had a pretty good relationship with him, and for all intents and purposes, we knew that he suffered from depression, but for all intents and purposes, everything was okay. it wasn't until he'd passed away and we start seeing what's happening with paperwork and finances and things like that, you realise that like that whole world had completely collapsed on him. So thinking about like, you know, at what point have I, and this is a can of worms, right? But you don't want to say, what could I have done to make a difference? Because you can't really do a lot to make a difference when something like that's happening. But again, I'm sort of thinking in learning for the future, trying to approach people that are dealing with these issues, but not being, to your earlier point, interrogating or not going too deep on things, because sometimes people just don't want to talk. If we realise there's someone in our care that doesn't want to talk, what is the logical next step for us as leaders? Or what should we be doing if that person doesn't want to engage directly?
Yeah, and I think the important thing to do there is not to try and force somebody to talk. We've got this, you know, inherent goodness in us that we want to make a problem go away for somebody. We want them to be well.
We want to be fixers.
And it's not that simple. And if somebody doesn't want to talk to me, I would encourage them, I would ask them, is there anybody else that you would rather talk to? Can I get you some information that you would look at? You know, and ultimately, if you do decide you do want to talk to me, I'm always here to have that conversation. So, and it's understanding why they don't want to talk to somebody, and it could be a case of a financial issue.
Yeah,
you know, they can't find a bulk billing doctor that they've got confidence in. They may not have confidence in the doctor. So it's really a case of if somebody, and again, I'm not a counsellor, but you know, this is certainly what the mental health first aid approach is to get the information to people and ask them, you know, if not me, is there somebody else you would rather speak to, a family member, or? And there's many like Australia. You know, this isn't meant as a flippant comment in any shape or form, but if you're going to have mental health challenges, Australia is the place to be, because there's so many great organisations that offer great resource and support out there, and there's many avenues you can call on, many organisations to say, look, I'm actually speaking to a friend, a colleague, a family member, and this is what they're saying. Can you help me? Can you advise?
What are you doing, Mike, for businesses currently that can help them? How are people best to leverage your ability, and what sort of things can people reach out for?
So the organisation I've set up, it's not the most inventive title. It's Mike Hagan Consulting Services.
I'll know that it's you.
And the tagline is creating better workplaces. And so through my checkered career of, I guess, having some lived experience, but more importantly, put in place many OHS risk management systems that I extended to some mental health topics before it was trendy. So the offering to organisations is to speak to them, to identify what they can do to make their organisation, the people within it, I don't use the term resilience because I go back to the canary in the coal mine, but making it a better fit for between the work and the individuals. So the organisations I'm talking to, I go in and I explain, first get to the bottom of the issue, what is it? And there's some great tools that we use to go out, and they're evidence-based tools, they're not according to the science of Mike. And it'll give you, people call them risk assessments, and they're not. And if you just bear with me, I'll differentiate between a risk and a hazard. And I used to thoroughly enjoy explaining this to colleagues from overseas when I was dealing with a multinational. And I explained to them the difference between a risk and a hazard. So in Australia, everybody's got a swimming pool. And everybody's got a shark in the swimming pool. And that gets people's attention. Some people believe me. And we're sat on the balcony, me and you are sat on the balcony, Mike, and we're looking down at the shark. So what's the hazard and what's the risk? And I'll bring this back to psychosocial. So the thing with the potential to do harm is the shark. So that's got to be a hazard. You and I are sat on the balcony. How much risk? Not too much. So then we get to talking about the good days and the old times, and we have a few beers, and we decide to go and sit down near the pool.
I can see where this is going. Yep.
And as the night progresses, we have a few more beers, and then we start daring each other, and then you come up with this crazy idea of strapping a stake to your back and jumping in the pool. So like risk versus hazard. And when you pull the information together in an organisation, there's a couple of ways you can do it. One is the survey. You can go out and say, you know, how do you feel about this? How do you feel about that on a scale of 1 to 7? Is it a 1? Is it a 7? But you've also a great set of data a useful set of data in terms of what I call the authentic mirror as to what's going on in the organisation. So what have been the allegations? I don't want to know the names. I just want to know what the allegations are and how often they happened. What is the attrition rate? I've spoken to some organisations that have got significant attrition rates around these problems. Looking at previous employee surveys, and there's a whole bunch of information, and interviewing managers.
Yep.
So when you get that, let's call it some evidence, some anecdotal, and you get the surveys together, you pull it together, and all we know is there are sharks. We don't know what the risk level is. Because I go back to the forklift, you and I. Some people it impacts, some people it doesn't. And that's where the real clever part of manipulating that data and understanding that data, and often you'll need help to do that. I do some of that, but I also engage people who've got more psychosocial background, org psych background, to help on some of the... Nobody knows all the answers. And anybody who says that they can actually put in a strategy end to end, don't believe them.
Yeah.
Because I listen to some of the most prolific speakers on this topic in Australia, and they'll put their hand up and say, we collaborate. So it's a case of getting to the data, understanding the data, and then starting to look at it from 3 lenses. But the most important lens is, how do we fix the work to stop this happening? And we can give education, and we can do downstream things. We're back to Desmond Tutu. It's not a case of just pulling people out the river, making them feel better than putting them back in the tide at the top.
Yep.
We've really got to get better at fixing the work and work design. And, that's really, really hard because the people that are deploying the targets are commercial.
Yeah.
And I've had a few conversations with colleagues in that space and said, how are you travelling with your psychosocial risk assessments that you've now got to do? Because that's what's coming. So it's really a perfect storm at the moment between the legislative changes that are coming into Australia and will be in Victoria also this year, the psychosocial health regulations. It says you've got to have a documented process and a risk assessment. The smart kids on the block are now implementing the international standard 45003, which is an add-on to 4501, which is basic risk management in the workplace. It's now a strap-on module around psychosocial. It's very detailed, it's very comprehensive, and it's very good. Yep. And it's written for humans, so you don't need to be a specialist. So between that, and then you throw COVID in, which brought mental health to a topic in every living room, it ain't going away.
No.
It ain't going away. So I can't even remember if I've answered your question.
Yeah, definitely. I think to extend on that, if a business is keen to take action, so now we've got the message, we understand that we need to do something and we really want to do something. What is because businesses have this amazing ability of, here's something new, let's do this, and we'll pour everything into it for a month and a half, and we'll talk about it in every meeting, and then it's gone. What is, if a business is in a place where there are problems, and we want to correct the ship, what is the realistic timeline of pushing the barrow to see the results that we want to see? And I know that could be a $12 million question, but
I was about to say you jump straight to 10 million there.
Yeah, because again, we all know that the 8-week thing is just that's great and that all seems good, and then it disappears. What is the realistic investment?
So the timeline is it's infinity. It's just the way we've got to do business, and there isn't anything that we do that when you think of how you plan your commercials, how you look at your quality issues, your logistics, it's always plan, do, check, act. And we plan, we put it in place, run it for a while, see what worked well, what didn't, and we go back and change. That's how it's got to be going forward, because you can plug and play and put in a perfect system that's good at midnight, and at 12:05 we get God knows, a global pandemic.
Yeah.
So it really is it's got to be a closed loop thinking. So I talked to organisations about strategic and holistic. So holistic starts pre-hire, finishes post-retire. The strategic is build it into a system, and this is what the international standards are around. This is what the legislative expectation going forward is around. So it really is that closed loop, continuously checking on it. And OHS, the Work Health and Safety, those guys have got the tools, but they need the help, because the people that are all across changing work patterns, it's HR that you need to help, because they understand the cause and effect of if we change that, what happens over there.
Yep.
So it really is, there isn't an 8-week loop. The advice I give to people, if there's one key thing, is don't spend $1. Do not spend $1 until you know what the problem is, or you're spending that dollar to find out what the problem is.
Yeah.
Because there's so many bright and shiny baubles, and they look great, and the marketing behind some of them is fantastic.
Yep.
But until you can get out there on the patio and we can look down and see if we've got sharks or not, find out what your sharks are.
Do we need champions in a business as well? It's all good for this to be handed down from a leadership perspective, as it often is. Do we need to find people in a business that can champion that story from different levels and from different points of view?
Can I use a different word instead of champion? What about competent people who have the competency? No, sorry, competent people. You have to cut that out. Competent people who have the capacity to do what needs to be done.
Yep.
Because champions, bless them, we've all been there. We've all put our hands up, and whether it was as an HSR or as a well-being point of contact. But ultimately, if it's important in a business, it gets resource, and it needs to be built into that fabric. There needs to be somebody with a capability and the capacity to do what needs to be done. And now, what needs to be done? Until you do the assessment, you don't actually know. And I'll guarantee any organisation that does an assessment, it'll tell them some things they know, but it'll tell them some things that they don't know as well. So, it's easy to. I talk about the bowls of fruit and the yoga and the yoga classes. When I wasn't feeling great, no banana helped me feel better. And I'd done yoga. I wasn't very good at it, but it didn't really make me feel. It didn't make the work any better. It didn't make the way I was handling myself in the work environment any wiser. We've got to make sure that we don't get drawn to the shiny lights, and we look at evidence-based tools to tell us what are the problems, and then we put in some things that won't close it in 8 weeks, but in a 3-year cycle we'll have eradicated this issue, and we'll put measures in place to stop the good old finance having to work till midnight at each financial end of year.
Yep. What does Mike Hagan do for himself to stay balanced and level both in and outside of work? What's the thing for you?
You're making an assumption that I'm balanced there, Mike.
To attempt to stay balanced. Yeah.
Look, I do a lot of things, and I do a lot of things because I have to. And I mentioned the challenges that I had. Did all that end 20 years ago? No, absolutely not. And every so often I'll start to see the signs in myself that I need to recalibrate and make sure I do get the balance right, but I do know what the signs are. I've got a wonderful relationship where I've got my wife who will actually point them out as well. So I invest in that relationship. I do a lot of things, really. I get up before dawn and I go walk in the hills in Fern Tree Gully, and I still do what I term as yoga for not bendy people.
Yeah.
And my other outlet is music. So I do audio engineering and I write songs and record.
You've got your album here.
There you go. It's just a shameless plug for an album.
Yeah, that's fine. That's what we're about.
The only downside with the album is that prior to COVID, it was $10 to post anywhere overseas.
Yep.
Post-COVID, 28 plus customs tax. So, hey kids, stay digital.
Yeah.
But yeah, look, all joking aside, I really
exercise is important, right? Exercise is one of those things that
always move.
Yeah.
Always move.
Yeah.
And I'm not an athlete, but I get out. I make sure I get me 10,000 steps a day. Get a dog. That helps. You've got to get out then.
And I got a dog in COVID for the same reason. Yeah. For people that struggle to stay active, are there any little things that can be done on the daily to keep mentally fit, but I physically I just can't move that way? What sort of things mentally can we be doing on the regular? Meditation, things of that nature. Are there little things that can help, just on the daily?
Again, not a medical background. I read a really good book. I might get the pronunciation wrong recently. Ikagi, maybe I have that wrong. And it's a study of the blue zones in the world where people live till they're 100. And this book, I think it's only about 12 months old, the book, called $16, great buy. And they looked at one of the northern islands in Japan where they've booked the trend and people live till 110. Not everybody, that would be weird. And And one of they identified a number of things that contributed. And it was eating well, and there's a good diet in that part of the world. But a huge part of it was community. And thankfully, in this day and age, technology can lend to community as well. So if people aren't mobile, so again, without a medical qualification, what I would advise people to do is have somebody you're speaking to on a regular basis, contribute towards something, and acknowledge other people's contribution, because community, I hark back to the workplace community. We all talk about you spend a third of your life at work. Yeah, but you spend lots of hours thinking about work when you're outside there as well.
Yeah.
So whether it's workplace community, whether it's community outside work, I'm a big advocate for being engaged with others.
The $10 million question. So knowing what you know now and having been through the experiences you've been through, what advice would you give to 14-year-old Mike?
Oh, fashion tips aside, yeah, I would have told 14-year-old Mike to pull his neck in and stop thinking that he had to be the hardest bloke on the planet.
That's a good one, because I think for men particularly, and it's good to see that things are changing, but the hardest thing about being a bloke is working out what a bloke's meant to be like, and that is so that hinges so much so on who those male role models are. I didn't have amazing male role models. I had a couple of good male role models early on, but it's that thing of, if I knew better, I'd probably do better. I think now the one thing that at least we're talking about it more. We're talking about more, what does it mean to have masculine energy, and what is the limit of masculine energy, and what is toxic masculinity, and all those sorts of things. Because I think men, to sort of encompass where we've been speaking today, men try so hard to be men that they tend to ignore all the other things that are important in being a man. And then we end up unhealthy, right? It's that sort of approach to things. If people want to reach out and get some advice, where do they go? What's the best way to get it? We'll have links and things up in that, but a quick and easy way to get in touch. You've got a website up there?
If you pump in Mike Hagan Consulting. There's actually two sites. One is Mike Hagan Consulting, and that's where I talk about these things. And there's Mike Hagan The Distant Conspirators, which is my music project. So if you do land there inadvertently, buy a CD. But then jump across to Mike Hagan Consulting.
It's when you organise the Mental Health Awareness Day at work, and you show up with the band, and people realise that they made the wrong booking. Is that going to be an issue?
You've got a past in music. You'll understand. You take any booking.
Mark, it's been a really good conversation. I would like to do this again. I think it's one of those things that we can't do enough. So let's call this part one of a couple more to come, because I think we could probably go a little bit deeper, but it's been my pleasure. For the folks at home, if you want to get in touch, reach out to Mike and any of the information that he's got available. We'll have all those links. But the message today is take care of your people, take care of yourself, and build amazing culture that's going to see everyone happy and healthy.
Create better workplaces.
Beautiful.
Thanks,
Mike. Appreciate it. Thank you.